Hello everyone. I know, long time no see. I am so sorry for ghosting you all with the podcast episodes. Last year ended up being such a hectic year that I couldn't even put it into words. I had so much work going on. I bought a house, I went to CrimeCon, and then just life in general. Life sometimes just gets in the way and time runs away from you, and I absolutely hate disappointing you all. Over the last year, since I've stopped releasing episodes, I have had so many of you reaching out to us daily asking when the podcast's coming back. It really touched me heart that you all loved it so much and that even a year later, I'm still getting people asking after it. It felt absolutely insane that so many of you wanted it back. So many of you enjoyed the episodes. I've had people say that they have listened to podcast episodes over and over and over until I release new ones, and that is just mind-boggling to me. Like, I proper get like imposter syndrome. So yeah, it was really nice to read all those comments to see how many of yous want it back, and here I am, and I am not going anywhere. There are going to be a couple of changes this time around, however. True Crime with Caitlyn is going to start off as a fortnightly podcast, meaning that new episodes are going to be released every 2 weeks. So fortnightly episodes are going to be out on Mondays at 8 a.m. You'll have already noticed I have some amazing new artwork which was made by a brilliant local artist to me. You can find her on Instagram at megmcart. She did an absolutely amazing job, and I didn't even really give her any hints on what I wanted. I gave her full creative control and she absolutely slayed it. She did amazing. I have changed my Instagram handle, so everything to do with the podcast and me true crime work in general will be over on at TrueCrimeCaitlyn, no longer TrueCrimeCaitlyn Pod. So make sure you go and follow us over there. That's where I'll be posting images relating to the cases I talk about and so on. Right, I think I've covered everything. So with that, I am back and let's get into today's episode. Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of True Crime with Caitlyn. Today we're going to be discussing a case about a young girl who, with the help of her even younger brother, annihilated their entire family, committing one of the biggest family murders in American history. This is the case of the Bailey family massacre. Today's case takes place in West Virginia, 1969. 41-year-old Charles and 36-year-old Ruby Bailey were the proud parents of 13 children. These were Judith, Nancy Lee, Susie Jane, Roger, Teresa May, Claudie Kay, Mary Helen, Timmy Edward, Debbie Lou, Frankie Steve, Dale Ray, Charles Teddy, and Ricky Dwayne. At the time of this case, Judith was an adult and wasn't living with the family. She was in Illinois, living with her husband, Mr. Fury. The Baileys were originally from Wirt County, West Virginia, but moved half an hour up the road to Parkersburg, where Charles had been offered a better paying job within the maintenance sector. Of course, he was going to happily accept a better paying job. He had bills to pay and several mouths to feed. The family moved into a wooden built 7-bedroom home with a tar paper roof. Despite us saying that it was 7 bedrooms, it wasn't a big home by any means. Some reports would describe it as a shack. The Bailey children would be described as very ordinary. However, it would be the second oldest daughter, Susie, who was 15, who really caused any issues for the family. She would skive off of school. She spent time in a reform school at one point, which was kind of like a young offenders institute. She would often argue and defy her parents, and she was very much a handful. Things between Susie and her father Charles would reach a boiling point in June 1969. Charles discovered that Susie, who again is only 15, was dating 19-year-old Johnny Bumgarner, who also happened to be her full first cousin. It was an incestuous relationship. Johnny's mum and Susie's dad Charles were full brother and sister. Charles forbid Susie from this relationship and demanded that she break things off. but she wouldn't listen. She would sneak out of the house to go and see Johnny, and they would openly go out together and not even try to hide what they were doing. Eventually, realizing that Susie wasn't going to stop, Charles threatened her and told her that if she didn't cut ties with Johnny and keep away from him, he would report Johnny to the police and get him arrested, because even without the incest factor within the relationship, he was 19 dating a 15-year-old. But Susie wasn't going to let that happen. She would go to her 13-year-old brother Roger, who I can only imagine was her closest sibling, because I can't think of another scenario where she would go to someone and ask what she was about to ask Roger. She explained to him what Charles was going to do. He was going to get Johnny arrested because of their relationship, and she didn't want to end things with Johnny. She loved him and she wanted to be with him, so she had to do something drastic and she needed Roger's help. Susie proposed an evil plan, and shockingly, without question, he agreed. During the early hours of the 8th of June 1969, Susie slipped from her bed and creeped to Roger's bed, shaking him awake. It was time. The siblings snuck outside to Charles's truck, where they siphoned some gasoline from the tank and poured it into plastic bins. The siblings waddled back to the house and quietly creeped around, splashing the gasoline across the floors and the walls, dousing the entire home. With not even a second to pause or consider the ramifications of what they were about to do, they lit a scrap bit of paper on fire and from outside threw it through a window and watched as their home of only about 2 weeks, containing their entire family, became engulfed in scorching orange flickering flames. Within seconds, the home was consumed by the fire. Susie and Roger fled, running to a nearby shop where Susie rang Johnny, who came and picked them up. Eventually, he would drop Roger off at an auntie's house not too far away, but he didn't do that immediately, so I can only guess that they drove around for a bit. The fire would be quickly reported by some motorists who were at a nearby Jumbo's drive-in restaurant type thing. The flames were so powerful and ferocious that they could be seen from a distance. Officer Charles Lawrence, who was out on patrol, noticed the flames just before he received the dispatch call. When he arrived at the home, it was completely consumed by the flames, so hot that they were over 800 degrees. The front door of the house had swung open and he saw the flames all the way through the hallway and coming out of the roof. He heard a woman screaming, and following the sound, he raced to the back of the home and he could see the outline of a woman through the burning wood, picking up a rock so heavy that it was likely adrenaline that lifted it from the ground. Charlie threw it through the side of the house to try and almost make an entryway so that he could go in and save her, but immediately, as soon as the rock went through the walls immediately caved in, and within those mere seconds, the woman was completely burned. People from the Jimbo's restaurant had raced over to the house to try and help, throwing water and that, and one shouted to Officer Lawrence that there was a baby. He ran to the window at the front of the house where he described trying to save the baby, saying, quote, "I got below the window, looked over the window, and I could see a baby in a crib. I reached into the window, grabbed hold of the covers and dragged the baby over to the side of the window. I ducked back down to get a breath, and when I got back up to grab the baby was totally burnt up." Grandfather Obie Bailey would be found just outside of the house. He didn't live with the family, but he was staying with them because he had some health issues and the family lived closer to the hospital than he did. He miraculously managed to escape the roaring fire by climbing out of the bathroom window. Now, at the time, and sort of just after as well, he got a lot of stick for not going back into the house and trying to save anyone, but this is a 63-year-old man with health issues who was in complete shock. Even the officers who eventually discovered him collapsed into a chair, described him as being in shock, glaring into space. Likely, he heard the screams of his daughter, son-in-law, and grandchildren as they burned to death. 12 members of the Bailey family would perish in the fire. 41-year-old Charles Edward, 36-year-old Ruby Jane, Nancy Lee, who was 17, Teresa May, who was 11, Claudie Kay, who was 8, Mary Helen, who was 7, Timmy Edward, who was 6, Debbie Lou, who was 5, Frankie Steve, who was 3, Dale Ray, who was 2, Charles Teddy, who was 1, and baby Ricky Dwayne, who was only 6 months old. The 2 surviving children, Susie and Roger, would be found at relatives' homes. They were at separate houses though. Roger was at one auntie's and Susie's was at another. She was found with Johnny, so it's safe to assume that she was at his mum's house. Quickly, the fire marshal knew that this was no accidental fire, it was a deliberate arson. A fire of this size could only come from an accelerant being used, and he was right. Suspicion quickly fell on Obi, as he was the sole survivor, the only person to escape the burning building from the only room that hadn't been doused in gasoline. When interviewed, it was discovered that he had lied to police about something surrounding his finances, so it began to build a picture where potentially they thought he could have done it so that he could collect life insurance money. That is just a theory though. Back at the house where Roger was staying, the adults were openly speculating about what had happened and Obi's potential involvement. Now, either wanting to clear his granddad's name, or thinking that he was clever, knowing something that the adults didn't, or because he genuinely wanted to get it off of his chest. Roger told his auntie, I believe, quote, "I bet you $10,000 that Grandpop didn't start that fire." She asked him what he was talking about, what did he know? To which Roger said, quote, "If you won't tell anyone, I will tell you something about that fire." He then went on to explain in detail his and Susie's entire plot, that Charles was going to report Johnny to the police and get him arrested, and in order to stop this and continue their relationship, Susie, with the help of Roger, set fire to the house that would go on to kill 12 members of their family. Now, this is where it gets a little bit muddy. So some reports state that the auntie contacted the police after this confession. However, it would be the assistant fire marshal who would continue the investigation. So I don't know if maybe she contacted him because she knew that he was investigating the fire and that's why he proceeded, or if she did actually contact the police and they completely and utterly dropped the ball. The marshal interviewed 13-year-old Roger without him having any sort of legal representation, who relayed the confession onto him in its entirety. The marshal asked the family who were caring for Susie to restrict her of food and sleep so that she could potentially be more susceptible to speaking and confessing to him. The family awoke Susie in the early hours of the 10th, so 2 days after the fire, and ushered her to the marshal, who did read her Miranda rights, and in return did obtain a confession from her which was identical to Roger's. Both of the children would be arrested and charged with 12 counts of first-degree murder, and they were set to be tried as adults. Judge Donald Black was one of 2 judges within the county, and he was the one presiding over the case, and it was actually his own son, Bob Black, who was one of the defense attorneys provided to the siblings. All of the attorneys involved worked to get the confessions thrown out. They were quote-unquote bad confessions because they weren't obtained by a police officer or an investigator. They were given without the presence of legal counsel, and by now both of the siblings had gone through psychological evaluations. These evaluations found that Susie, at 15 years old, had the intelligence and the reading ability of a 10-year-old and the IQ of 70. According to MedicineNet, an average IQ would be from 90, and someone with an IQ of 70 and under would indicate intellectual inability. Roger was also found to have below average IQ. Because of these evaluations, Judge Black believed that Susie and Roger didn't fully understand their rights, that they could have had a lawyer, and that they had the right to silence and what would happen following giving these confessions. Because of this, the confessions were thrown out, ruled as inadmissible, and the prosecutor's case rested entirely on the confessions, so without them, there was no case, meaning that Susie and Roger Bailey were allowed to walk free after confessing to horrifically and senselessly massacring 12 members of their family. The 12 perished Bailey family members were laid to rest in Elizabeth, Wirt County, West Virginia. 6 coffins contained 2 family members each, none of them being buried alone. Susie and Roger were both allowed to attend the funeral, but not the actual burial, where if they had, they they would have witnessed Aubrey's wife, their nana, Ruby's mum, screaming in heartbreak and trying to jump into the mass grave. After being allowed to walk free, both of the siblings would be placed into foster care. Roger moved in with a family in North Carolina, where, according to his older sister Judith, who I mentioned right at the beginning, said that he settled well. After that, I couldn't find a single update on him. If he is still alive, he will be around 68 now. Susie would be taken in by a woman in Ohio who said, quote, "I am one of these people who takes in every stray dog." Don't know how I feel about that. Susie would go through a complete identity change, her name being changed to Laura Jane Boone. Laura was the name of one of our aunties, not Johnny's mum though, so I wonder if she got to pick her name. Unlike Roger, Susie struggled to settle. She continued to refuse to go to school and attend educational courses. She often ran away and was returned back to her foster parents by the police. She would continually get into trouble with her foster parents for sneakily seeing a boy, allowing him to come into their home while they were working. And do you have any guesses who that boy might be? If you said her cousin Johnny Bumgarner, you would be right. Susie spent around about 6 weeks in a mental institution in Athens, Ohio, before managing to run away, and she was never seen by her foster parents again. She had only been with them for around about 7 months. She did send Roger a letter telling him that she had gotten married and moved to the northeast. Many online speculate that it was Johnny that she married. However, after combing through family trees and marriage licenses, I couldn't find that concretely. There are screenshots floating about, but I couldn't find anything personally, so I'm not 100%. Johnny died in 2014 at 64 years old, and according to his obituary, he left behind a fiancée named Sandy and many children, but no mention of the children's mother. So could they have been married and divorced? Who knows? After Susie sending the letter to Roger, I couldn't find any more about her. If she is alive, she will now be in her 70s. Where the Bailey home once stood, there was a Kmart shop erected where both employees and customers would report seemingly paranormal activity. Customers would report seeing a woman cradling a baby vanish in front of their eyes. Could this be Ruby holding baby Ricky? Employees would report toys from the toy aisle ending up in completely different parts of the shop. Could this be one of the many children still wanting to play? Thank you so much for joining me for today's episode. Please don't forget to follow the podcast wherever you're listening and leave me a 5-star rating. Make sure to head over to Instagram at TrueCrimeCaitlyn, where you can see pictures relating to today's case and any and all updates. Drop a comment on my latest post and tell me your thoughts about this case, and I will see you in 2 weeks' time with a brand new episode.